notification or something. We should be good.
Yeah, it says it's recording.
Excellent. Perfect. So we should be good. Yeah, and I think maybe someone else trying to join. Yeah, one more. Perfect. Sophia. Awesome. Let me just clear everything. Yeah. Okay. I think we're good. And then what we'll do is, as if people join, they can. They're more than welcome to join. Is this kind of all we're expecting, or is there going to be anyone else? Just thinking before I go.
I don't. My sister's not joining because she's putting her kids to bed, and I don't know if my brother's joining. So. Okay,
and Glenn, I don't know if you were trying to speak, but I think you might be muted right now. It's okay.
Okay.
Oh, now we can hear you, Glenn. So.
Yeah, thank you. Here I was mentioning that people get on Zoom and they forget to turn on their mic. Hello, Wendy. I haven't seen you for quite a while.
Decades. Decades.
And Randy is showing his car.
They're trying to get it up onto their smart TV. Jess is trying to get it on the smart TV. So they're having technical difficulties.
Yeah, he's having his daughter help him.
Yes.
I was thinking she's 17 and he said, no, she's 40. I went, what?
She is. I know.
Chris see his picture. He should be up.
Yeah, I think I saw Chris earlier. So
yeah,
he's still here. So awesome. But what I'll do, guys, just to keep us kind of on time and stuff. Because there's quite a bit to go into. But I'll first introduce myself. So my name's Joe MacDonald. I'd met Glenn and Chris before. They'd come actually just a couple days ago to our regimental museum. I'm the regimental historian for the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, but really my speciality is with the 49th Battalion, so the same unit that Frank PILKIE served with during the First World War. Now, I'd first heard, I guess Glenn had called the museum. I just got a message from Randy. Okay, Randy, as long as you can see us, that's great, so no problem. If you have to send a question or anything, you can do through the chat. That's no issue. But yeah, so when Glenn mentioned that you guys are, because I believe all of you guys are going to France quite soon, I was quite excited because a big passion of mine is actually battlefield tours. So my background is I'm a university student here in Edmonton, but then in the summers I actually go back to France and I lead battlefield tours. So especially Australian, but I do a lot with 49th Battalion families like yourself and so on and so forth. Fortunately, the dates didn't align, but what we're going to do this webinar, it's telling Frank's story, but in the context of the battlefield today, so that when you guys go out there, you can use this as a bit of a resource, and you can watch the video or download the video and that sort of thing. So when you go to places like Vimy Ridge or Flanders or the Somme, wherever it may be, you can have this as kind of in your repertoire, so it shares the story. Because instead of just looking at all the Canadians, this is a great way to bring it down to bring it home, if you will, with your family. So Frank's story is quite exceptional. We'll get into it a bit more. He was an original member of our unit, and he served all the way through the war. When the 49th Battalion was formed in 1915, there were 1,000 guys. Even then, they were weeding guys out, so they were all basically handpicked. And then when he arrives in the trenches, he's part of another handpicked group known as the Scout Section. And these are more or less the First World War version of the Special Forces. So these are the guys who are crawling out in no man's land. These are the guys with the sniper rifles. These are the creme de la creme on the dangerous end, and that's who he's serving with. What's quite remarkable, too, is he's there at the end of the war, even though he is wounded on Vimy Ridge in 1917. It's so few in number that 1,000 guys that have first joined the unit in 1915, Frank included, there's less than 200 who are still with the unit when they returned in 1919. So such was the attrition rate, but it wasn't that he was a coward at all. But I think one thing that Glenn had mentioned to me and Chris when we were at the museum last week was that by 1918 they were such seasoned soldiers that I think, Glenn, you had said they became efficient killers, that sort of thing. And
that's what he said. Yeah. They were well, he used the term, they were professional killers.
Yeah, there we go. So, and just before we go into it too, because Glenn, there's going to be moments in the presentation where I'll kind of give you the mic, and you share what you remember your grandpa telling you about the place I'll be talking about. But was there anyone else here tonight that had actually met Frank or remembered speaking with Frank before he passed away?
I guess that's everybody here.
Everyone. That's great. And did he, because I know he was open with Glenn about telling war stories, did he share any war stories with other people too, or?
Not really. I think I might have been too young at the time. But
Okay.
I heard stories sort of as a kid in the hallway listening.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I was asking Dad about it tonight, and he said he didn't really talk too much about it.
No.
Anything it was, very animated. It wasn't like the down and dirty parts of it. He more associated, anecdotes about the lighter times of being there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. So, no, that makes sense. But what was nice with Glenn, when he was sharing some of the stories, I was able to connect it to other stories I've heard from guys in the battalion through interviews and so on and so forth. And so tonight with the presentation, we'll connect some of those stories to the actual locations and the times. So, but I guess without further ado, I'll start up the presentation. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hang on, let me get it going properly. Give me one moment.
And Sophia hasn't come on your line yet, eh?
No, I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay. We just don't see your picture. Sorry,
Yeah.
Sophia.
No, it's okay.
Okay, well, we'll get into it, but guys, I do have to give a fair warning that sometimes the screen, for whatever reason, it's going to snap out of the screen sharing. So if that happens enough, I don't happen to get into it, and if I keep talking, then just stop me and I'll reshare it. So I don't know if it's a technical issue sort of thing, but it is what it is. What I did, this is a photograph. I guess Glenn, you have the original. This was taken in 1917, just before the Battle of Vimy Ridge. We'll get into where, at least I believe, it was taken later on in the presentation. But what I included here, of course, you have his name and everything. I should include an MiD. It's a gallantry award. He was awarded at the end of the war. But these are all the different battles he took part in. So tonight, what we're doing, we're trying to condense his war, and we're not going to do all of it, but into more or less an hour presentation. It's near impossible. Luckily, what you guys are doing when you get out there, your time. Oh, I think we might have someone else joining. Let me see. Perfect. Welcome. I think we got another one. Excellent. So when you guys get out there, I imagine you'll have about 3 days on the Western Front. And so I've kind of split them up into the 3 different sectors he served at. But really, where does the story start? It starts right here in Edmonton, Alberta. As you guys know, he signed up with the 49th Battalion, which would later become known as the Edmonton Regiment, of 13 different regiments that were formed in Edmonton, recruiting Edmonton men and that sort of thing. It's going to be the only one that actually serves in France. So for the history of Edmonton, it's a really important battalion. It's commanded by this man named Billy Griesbaugh. He was well liked. And it actually relates to your grandfather's story, and we'll get into that with an anecdote that Glenn has and a newspaper clipping and so on and so forth. This is the exact same recruiting poster that Frank would have seen back in 1915. He would have joined up at a place called Victoria Armories, which still stands today. And in 1914 had been a terrible year in Canada. There's not a lot of work, especially out west. And these guys who had first come out there, a lot of them are looking for adventure. And so the idea of signing up, going to war, was certainly appealing. The other thing, too, they're doing is the way of recruiting. They're recruiting based off of locality. So if you're from Edmonton, you can all join the Edmonton Battalion. And so all of a sudden, if all your friends and, let's say, your brother and so on and so forth ended up with, signing up, you're more likely to sign up, too. And so quite quickly, the whole population became mobilized. But in 1915, there was a real frenzy. Despite the news coming back from the front line saying that a lot of guys are being killed, there's not many gains, but guys are still wanting to sign up. And one of those guys that answered the call was, of course, Frank. When Frank enlisted, this is kind of what it looked like. They didn't really know there was going to be a war that was going to start. They weren't prepared. And so initially the training happened near the legislature grounds. and also in the streets in downtown Edmonton, and they were all wearing civilian clothes. So you would stay at home, you would sleep at home, then you would report to duty at 9 a.m. and you would go march around, even though it was still winter time. And then at the end of the day, you would go home until the next day. And so that's how it happened, until all of a sudden, about a month or two after Frank enlists, they get room at the what's now Northlands, but back then it was the exhibition ground. So just south of where the Coliseum is now in Edmonton, where they do K-Days and stuff like that. And that's where his battalion was based. And so you can see in the background here, you have some of these barns, and they were repurposed to be barracks for the men. And they did all sorts of training, a lot of route marches, a lot of drill, a lot of physical training. And by the end of May of 1915, that's when the call finally came that they're going to be shipping out. They hop on a train, and it takes them all the way to Montreal. And then from Montreal, they go to England, where they do a bit more training. And then, of course, eventually, and as you guys all know, he was bound for France. And so, and that's where he eventually ends up. How I've broken it up here, and that's just kind of the introduction. There's 3 real sectors for the Canadian Corps on the Western Front. So in the north, you have Ypres. This is really famous. This is where Passchendaele is. This is also where John McCrae writes his poem in 1915 in Flanders Fields. Further south, you have Vimy, which needs no explanation. And then all the way on the bottom, you have the Somme. All 3 sectors, these are the main sectors. Frank was at each of these. And so how I've kind of structured the, I guess, kind of, I don't know what you call it, webinar here, is breaking them down into the different sectors. So really, Ypres you could do in a day, Vimy you could do in a day, and the Somme you could do in a day. So if you guys are going, and if you budget 3 days for sort of thing, it could be a good itinerary. For Frank, he's initially training in Folkestone, so he's there from June until early October of 1915. He hops on a boat and takes him all the way down here to Boulogne. And apparently, according to first-hand accounts, a lot of the guys lost all what's the right word? Enthusiasm for the war on that boat trip. It was a really bumpy ride. Very good. And when they land at Boulogne, they can't find their way. They get lost trying to find their camp, and so they go by the same crossroads 6 times. And eventually, the French people who lived there came out with wine because they felt bad for them. So, anyways, that was his little welcome to France. But then they get put on boxcars and they come right to Ypres. So the same year that John McCrae wrote his poem, that's where they come in, and they're initially further south, but later they come into the Ypres salient in March of 1916. If you guys go to Ypres, you have what's known as the Cloth Hall, and it was by 1916, by the time Frank was there, largely destroyed. They've rebuilt it now, and now there's a museum inside, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And you can't believe that it's less than 100 years old, because of course it was all rebuilt after the war. But it is. But just once again, fabulous. Ypres has a lot of history. It goes back to kind of the mid-ages. There was a lot of cloth trade there, and that's why it's called the Cloth Hall. But then when the First World War came, the big reason why the British Empire came into war was to defend Belgian neutrality. And of course, one of the first things the Germans did was invade Belgium. And now Germany had possession of almost all of Belgium except for Ypres. And so that's why the British and the Commonwealth did everything they could to defend this last little segment of Belgium, because that's the whole political reason they were in the war. So one of those guys who are sent in is, of course, Frank with the rest of the Edmonton unit. Here's the modern Google map. It's a bit simplified, but you can see this is what's known as the Ypres salient. Nowadays, we'd probably call it a bulge. You can see this little bulge in the line, and it was terrible to be a soldier, whether you're in the front line trench up here in the blue or reserve line position a bit further back. This is Ypres right here. The reason why is, and you guys could probably figure it out pretty quick, but if you were positioned right where my cursor is, you're more or less surrounded on 3 sides. The big killer of the First World War, it's artillery. And so from the north, from the south, and from the east, German artillery guns could shell you. And so needless to say, it was one of the worst places on the Western Front to be, just because the casualties were so high. It's an attritional war. But for Frank, he would have recognized the Ypres salient in 3 ways. You have the front line positions here. You'd have the reserve lines. and then you would have the rest billets back here. This is important because for any infantry battalion, and we can see these are Canadian troops in the trenches here, they're going to spend 7 days in front line trenches, then another 7 days in reserve, so you're still under shell fire, but you're not as bad as being right in the front positions. And then lastly, and most importantly for the soldiers, is you have 7 days at rest. And then at the end of the cycle, it's all going to repeat again. So all that to be said, you know, if you do the math about how long Frank's in France, he gets here in October 1915. He's going to be wounded in 1917, but then he comes back and so on and so forth. He's spending a lot of time in the trenches. You know, 2/3 of the time you're in trench, only 1 week you're out of rest. And you can imagine the sort of stuff he's seen. A lot of stuff we won't know because perhaps he didn't say, or perhaps he didn't want to say, or perhaps he couldn't remember. But every day there's something traumatizing going on, a traumatizing experience. Just to give you an idea of, you know, one of the places that Frank went into, it's called Sanctuary Wood, and this is one of the locations I think it'll be important for you guys to visit during your trip. And this is a letter, or an extract from a letter written by a guy named William Laurie Hill. And only days later, they're going to do a counterattack after the Germans launch, take some of the trenches. The 49th Battalion is sent in to do a counterattack. And Private Hill is actually killed. So he dies only a few days after writing this. You've seen Sanctuary Wood mentioned in paper, I suppose. It used to be heavy wood in peacetime, but now the trees are stripped of their limbs and cut off by shells. When these large shells strike a tree, it's shrapnel, and the explosion will chew it right off. The Huns don't spare shells clean around out from hiding batteries. And you can just see this photograph taken a few months before Frank got there about the sort of stuff they're facing. So we can see the shattered trees, but then lower, you guys can see right here the barbed wire. And this is a huge obstacle. It's a grisly place to be, and then just don't forget that he's not only being there, but he's living there, right? 7 days in the front line, 7 days in reserve, and then out at rest, right? So it's remarkable what each of these guys went through. Moving on, I'd mentioned there was a big German attack, and luckily for Frank and his guys, they had just been relieved by a different unit from the frontline trenches. You can see these are some Canadian defenders. Unfortunately, had been killed. This is a photograph taken by a German infantry soldier who had just come into the Canadian front line. And that could have been Frank, you know, had it not been by chance that the attack happened on June 2nd. And if it happened just 3 days before, it would have been Frank in the front line. And what eventually happened, most of the front line trenches became overrun. And Frank and the rest of the guys who were now at one of the rest camps way back, they got called forward. I'll just show you here too how devastating that German barrage was on Sanctuary Wood. You can see this is it more or less before the battle, and then these aerials were taken just after. So you can see how that same position has been totally stripped, all the trees, stripped of everything. And yeah, and this is literally the battlefield he's coming into. If we look out right now, we can see this hut right here. This is approximately where Frank and the rest of the guys were. And they were, if you read the first-hand accounts, they say the ground started to rumble, even though they're about 8 kilometers away. There's a call to at camp, so they got the bugle sound. They know to kit up and everything. They have never been into battle before. They've heard about battles and so on and so forth. They've been in the trenches, but they've never had a hand-to-hand engagement with the Germans. And this is what they're coming into. And they can see all the smoke coming up. It's June, so it's very dry and all that. Eventually, they come in. They march through Vlamerting. They come under some German shell fire, so they hide in some high grass here until they eventually come into Ypres, down the main street, and then down south to what are the ramparts. And there they stayed until midnight, until it was dark enough, because they're going to move into the battle positions to do a counterattack. When they come forward, they come down this road. And then as they come down the road, and they have to cross this open field before they can get to the last Canadian trench line not held by the Germans. That's where they're going to launch off. And as they're moving over ground, like, you know, in the wide open, they're hoping that the Germans don't realize they're there, because there's about 600 guys in this open field. But unfortunately, what happens is that when Frank's about here, so he's halfway across, somewhere up here, a German shoots up a flare. And so when that German shoots up the flare, all of a sudden, night turns into day, and they can see all these guys coming. And so quickly the German artillery starts coming in. There's 2 machine guns, each firing 600 rounds per minute right here. and they apparently start opening up. But luckily, Frank and the rest of the guys, they actually get through, and they get to this position. From there, it's a waiting game. There were meant to be other guys that came. They never did. But eventually, there was an order that came in from a commander, Billy Griesbaugh, saying, no matter what, at 7 a.m., you guys have to go over the top and attack. And so if you guys ever seen a movie with a trench assault and so on and so forth with a bayonet charge and that sort of thing, that's exactly what happened. The only thing is normally there's a bit more planning, a bit more preparation, a bit more support. For Frank and the rest of the 49ers, there was no support. So there was going to be no artillery barrage, or there was meant to be, but there never came one. Instead of attacking at 2 a.m., they had waited so long waiting for these other support units to come that it was now broad daylight, 7 a.m. And even worse, it had given the Germans time to get into proper defensive positions, bring up supplies, bring up machine guns, and the Germans could tell that an attack was coming. And so at 7 a.m., when they went over the top, it was just a bloodbath and massacre. I think here I got a little quote from a 17-year-old. You can read it. Because what happens is when they do the charge, and you can see Lover's Walk right here, this is where Frank and the rest of the guys go over the top. They come down by tons of machine guns. They're trying to get all the way up here. It's impossible. And so the survivors, Frank included, they roll into these different communication trenches. And then it's literally a trench fight with bayonet, with grenade, with sometimes hand-to-hand fighting as they're trying to push through. And so it's only 2 days later, so it's about 40 hours straight of combat that they're eventually relieved. And when they're relieved, about 1 and 2 of the guys that had first come into the attack were either killed or wounded. And so when I had mentioned earlier with these traumatic experiences, Frank's going to go through many battles, but this is going to be his first battle he's in. And for any of the survivors who fought, all unanimously called it a Holocaust. It was just absolutely devastating, because it's not only their own comrades they're seeing, but the day before there was that heavy attack that came through. So they're fighting over the corpses of those guys. The trenches were apparently 2 to 3 deep and dead and wounded, and so it's remarkable that he made it through on his own. Now, Glenn, I think you had mentioned, and the reason why we're talking about this battle, one of the main reasons is that I think, Glenn, it was a story that had been shared, or there was reference to Sanctuary Wood and doing a trench assault and that sort of thing that your grandfather told you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was very brief. He said when they attacked at Sanctuary Wood, he said a French unit, how big, I don't know, had gone before them, and none of them had made it to Sanctuary Wood. He said when they attacked, he said they could not step anywhere where they did not step on a dead French soldier. That's how many soldiers were dead, laying on the ground, French soldiers, as they attacked.
Gotcha. So there was, I'll just kind of share with kind of what I know about the battlefield and what I'm thinking here. I don't know what would be the best slide. So if we go back here, I had mentioned that Frank and the rest of the guys, they had come overland. Normally, if you're going up the line, if you're going to an attack position in the First World War, you'll go through one of the trenches. It's much safer. I had mentioned there were 2 other battalions, 2 other support units that were meant to join them. One of those units was a French Canadian battalion, the 60th Battalion. They had come up through a trench system up on the north. And they were going to come down and that sort of thing, and it was going to be fine. But except the Germans had recognized that reinforcements were going to come through there, and they had got absolutely annihilated. They got stuck in this trench. They couldn't move backwards. They couldn't move forwards because there were so many corpses of dead and wounded, dead and dying guys. They got stuck there and absolutely pummeled. So I almost wonder if that's perhaps what he's referring to. But equally, there was all sorts of other guys in the wood too, right? But that's really interesting to hear, Glenn.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah. So anyway, but obviously this was a big battle for Frank and everyone else in the battalion. And what's quite good about the battlefield itself today is that that if we look at it, and you can see exactly the difference here. You can still see the trenches and all that. You have quite a bit to see in the area. So Sanctuary Wood is actually regrown. It's one of the remarkable things that even after all that shelling, it had regrown as a forest. And this is almost all private property up here. But the actual place that Frank did the charge, and also a lot of the trenches that he fought through, and there's now a memorial there too. They're actually open to the public. And so now you have what's known as Sanctuary Wood Cemetery. And you can see this is actually right through the cemetery is where the front line was. And when you walk the graves there, you'll actually come across quite a few 49th Battalion soldiers, including some where after the war, when they were finding the body, they could tell by the badging and so on and so forth that this is a 49er, but they couldn't tell the name because, you know, sometimes there's nothing to identify them, whether there's no more letters, there's no more dog tag, there's no more anything apart from the badging. So it's quite amazing to go see those graves and think that perhaps Frank saw them last alive, and then of course they're still there after 100 years. The other thing which is quite significant and important to visit too, and I know Chris, you had mentioned you know, the interest in seeing places that you know, were kind of as it was in the trenches, and they actually have a trench museum in Sanctuary Wood. It's one of the oldest museums. It opened up in the 1920s, and so you can still see some of the trenches now. These trenches, a lot of them don't date from 1916. They come in after. But it gives you a good impression, especially when you look at the photos of the mud and the depth and so on and so forth. I was speaking to one family who had a relative who actually, their grandpa and their grandpa's brother, and they had both fought in the trenches here. And he had come back and visited this trench museum in the 1960s. And once again, it's a 49er, it was in the same battle as Frank, and he said it was pretty darn realistic. Like you can see how the trenches weren't that deep, and he was saying it was like that during the battle. So once again, it's well worth a visit. There's also an inside section too, but that's just in Sanctuary Wood. The other places I think too, and I'm not going to spend too much time here, otherwise, you know, I could talk all day and that sort of thing. I've marked out a couple locations that when you guys go, and I'm sure you'll have enough trip planning and stuff like that, but some sort of must-see sites, and also anything in blue. These are all villages or frontline areas that Frank actually served in 1916. So I'll just go from kind of top right. You have Tynecott. This is just a cemetery, but it's the largest Commonwealth War Grave cemetery. There's over 12,000 burials. You also have the Passchendaele Museum and Hughes and Hill 60. These are all either museums or battlefield sites, but they're really neat because, for instance, Hughes, there's quite a few mine craters and preserved battlefields. Same with Hill 60. So that's worth a visit. And then Passchendaele does a great job at reconstructing what a trench system was like, what a British and what a German trench system was. And then likewise, they have a dugout display. It's phenomenal. You also have some commemorative sites like the Essex Farm Advanced Dressing Station. This is literally the spot that John McCrae wrote the poem. And they had actually done some excavations, and they dug out the earth, and they found the actual hospital that John McCrae was posted at in 1915 when he wrote that poem. You also have the Meningate Memorial, where they do a ceremony every night. And then further back, if you guys got time, there's some interesting stuff to see in the rear area at Popperinga. And there's prison cells, which also were execution cells for the soldiers who deserted, and a place called Talbot House, which was like a rest and relaxation house that a lot of 49ers went to. The special thing about Popperinga and a lot of these kind of rear areas is that the buildings that you'll be seeing, they haven't changed in hundreds of years. And so when Frank was there, he would have been seeing the same buildings you will be seeing, whereas everything in the forward area up here, it had been destroyed by shell fire and rebuilt. And so over here, these are the most important locations in the story. But when you go there, you're in the same space and, you know, different time, and it looks a bit different. But then if you come and you got the time to visit some of these rear areas, it's quite interesting to quite literally walk in his footsteps on the same cobblestones. So is there, before we start, kind of move on to the next sector, is there any questions so far? Or I know I've covered quite a bit, and I have a tendency to talk quick, so. Or it's all good?
I'm good.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Anyway, I'm so excited for you guys with the trip. I think it's gonna, you guys will have so much fun. It's, well, not fun, that might not be the right word, but it's such a remarkable story, and it'll be neat to walk that ground. The next thing we'll talk about is the Psalm. Now, I'm curious, has anyone heard of the Psalm here?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a bit well known, or it's it's really well known for the British. So this is kind of their main battle. But then for the Canadians, it's actually the bloodiest battlefield ever. I just heard a noise. I want to make sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I just remember a couple of stories from Grandpa Frank about the Somme.
Oh, yeah. What do you remember?
Well, no, continue.
Okay.
I remember him talking about the mud
Yeah.
and how they lost some mules or horses off the duck boards, and they were gone in the mud.
Oh, really? Interesting. And it's specifically the Somme, hey?
I think it was. I'm sure it was a Somme. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good to know, because I know Glenn has a similar anecdote. Oh, well, not similar, but also another anecdote for the Somme, and I think I know which battle he was talking about in that regard. So, well, that's good to know. Thanks for sharing. I'll include it a bit. It'll be at the end of this kind of segment, but that's awesome. But if you guys go to the Somme, the main village there, it's called Albert, but we would pronounce it as Albert, just like the name. And this has been a bit rebuilt, and it's now a museum. It's all underground and in the tunnels and that sort of thing. But you can see all the British soldiers marching here, and the 49th Battalion actually marched by here to go to the battle positions further beyond. And every single diary or interview, they always remark about the fallen basilica, or this is basilica, but the fallen statue. And a lot of soldiers were quite superstitious, and so they always had an idea that as soon as it fell, the war would end. But then, if you look up, the French engineers had actually fixed it into place, right? So the war didn't end quite yet, but it was quite an important thing, and I'm sure Frank noticed it when he was walking down this actual street right here to go to the battle area. So we're now talking about September 1916. So it's just 3 months ahead of when he was at Saint Wood in that big battle. And by that time, there had been a lot of stuff that had happened. The main British offensive for that year wasn't going to be up in Ypres or anything like that. It was going to be down further south on the Somme. If you remember where we are, there's not a photo, but we're now way on that southern sector. And the idea was they could have French troops and British troops attacking side by side, because it's where the two armies connected. But then there's going to be some problems. There's not as many French troops that can come, and the tactics and the soldiers the British are using are not very good. They famously told their soldiers that there won't be a rat that survives the bombardment, so you can walk across no man's land. But unfortunately, what happens is that when that attack takes place, you can see most of the arrows here showing that they didn't actually get into the German trenches. There's only a few places they did. And still to that day, that first day of battle, there's 58,000 British soldiers that are killed, wounded, or missing in no man's land here. So it's the bloodiest day in history for the British Army. But there's some success, and so they keep moving. And so by September, all this ground had been captured. And this should say second line here, sorry. And so when the Canadians eventually come in, they're going to be going into action against this place up here, Courcelette. Now, for Canada, Courcelette, the battlefield itself, it's not very well known. But as I mentioned earlier, it's actually one of the bloodiest Canadian battlefields. It's more bloody than Vimy Ridge and Juno Beach combined, which is quite amazing to think about. And this is the first battlefield that Frank's going to serve on. Going to serve in France. So on the 15th of September, they do a big push, a big attack. And as I mentioned before, they're at this place called Pozières. And so Frank doesn't actually go over the top in that first attack that happens that morning. What the Canadians are trying to figure out is if they could actually break through the different German trench lines right here and capture Courcelette. And if they think they can, then they're going to call in Frank's unit and some other units, and they're going to continue the attack that night and capture Courcelette in the ground to the west. And so it was successful, and so that's what actually happens. So Frank comes on in, and he actually comes down this road. They get kitted out for the last time in this old chalk quarry. And as they make their way through here down this road, everything's fine and dandy until all of a sudden, to get to the front line, which is about here, you turn right here, and as you guys can see, it's extremely open in this area. And his battalion, the 600 guys of the 49th Battalion, were behind another unit. And so all that to be said, the Germans could tell exactly where they were going. And it wasn't just the Germans in the front line, but the Germans in the rear who were in charge of the artillery. And so he and other guys had to cross what was known as a gauntlet of fire or current fire. And so as he was moving across here, there were guys falling wounded or dead, etc. But they were under strict orders just to keep going. They needed all guys they could at the front line. And eventually he made it up here. Now we have a map in our museum, and it's as you guys can see, it's an awesome map. It shows where the trenches were at Courcelette, but it can also show all these different details about the enemy snipers and enemy machine guns up here on this road, and so on and so forth. It's quite significant because we can figure out where the different companies were, and we know that by this time, Frank was serving with headquarters as a scout. And he was attached to battalion headquarters because he was being a runner for Griesbach. And now there's a particular story here, and I'm going to invite Glenn once again to take over in a minute. But long story short, what happened was when the 49th Battalion came into battle, they had to establish their forward battalion headquarters somewhere. And so as we can see on this map right here, it was established right in the sunken lane. Now, when they did that, and you can see right here, that's that sunken lane. This is where the photo is, and I'm looking down. The sunken lane's right here. And they had taken a German dugout, which was dug there, once again, just into the little shrub. And it was all fine and dandy until about 4 or 5 a.m. When something bad really happens. And once again, Frank is literally right there against the shrub when it happens. Now, Glenn, would you be able to share kind of what you remember your grandpa telling you?
Yes, he said he'd been out in no man's land scouting German movements, and he came in to report to Griesbach. And as he was reporting to him, shells hit. Now, he said at the entrance, and you were thinking it fell on top. Doesn't matter. It blew everything and sealed everybody in. And what he remembers next, and I know the story was they dug Griesbach out, of course, the general, left everyone for dead. Grandpa woke up. He said the fresh air got to him. He woke up, and he noticed around him there were a lot of dead comrades. And he said he staggered back to the aid station. I said, wow, Grandpa, that was like, how did you survive, the concussion and everything? He says, I have a theory on that. He said, I had a pipe in my mouth at the time, and it provided, he said, an airway into his head, and he figures that's what saved him from being killed from the concussion. Now, the other interesting part I found interesting, the Edmonton Journal reported on this, and they described it as digging the general out, Griesbach, and then there was a line that as yet they have not heard of the fate of young PILKIE. Like everybody in Edmonton knew who young PILKIE was. and it was quite interesting. They didn't know the fate of him, but they knew he was there for some reason. But so that was the story that Grandpa told me. Yeah,
it's quite remarkable because just for context here, if we go back to this map, that makes perfect sense. Once again, he was a scout, and they weren't exactly sure what the situation was for these guys up here, B&D Company. What had happened was they were told to go out to where there was a chalk mound out in no man's land, and then just go dig a trench. And so they were totally cut off. They were just this isolated position. You have to go about 250 yards into no man's land before you got there. So they didn't know if they were still alive or if they had casualties, what they needed, right? And so they would send out the scouts. And so Frank would have been sent out. And then this was all at nighttime, because what we do know is that between 4 and 5 a.m., so once again, it would still be dark, that's when the shell hits. And it was during a big bombardment. So everything you were saying there just makes perfect sense. So we can kind of track his movements thanks to your anecdote there, Glenn. The other thing too is, you know, he had mentioned the aid station. Now, near the battalion headquarters, I think it's actually just up here, and I don't know if it mentions here. Yeah, collecting stations. So that's kind of the, you know, the first place for the wounded and that sort of thing. That's where the medical officer would have been. Oh, I think it stopped sharing. Let me deal with this. Here we go. I think we're back. Now it's up here. He would have staggered. So more or less kind of where I took this photo. Now, if he wanted to get to the hospital, the next closest hospital, if you guys can believe it, can you guys see the trees just on the horizon up here? That's how far you'd have to go. It's about a mile away. And it's through up and down with the not the mine craters, but the shell craters. And so for a lot of the wounded who got hit in the legs or something like that, where it was a debilitating wound, they were left here until a stretcher bearer could come up. But meanwhile, the stretcher bearers were so busy trying to evacuate casualties all the way over there. You can imagine how long it takes just to get one wounded soldier back to the aid station, that so many just lied here on the road waiting for someone to come. They were short of water as well, and sadly they expired. So that's one of the things that shows up in Griesbach's after action report, saying that during that battle in particular, the evacuation was terrible. And so had things been different, you know, it could have been quite different for your family story here. Awesome. You just want to make sure you guys are still with me, right? My screen just changed. Oh,
We're here.
well, perfect. Is the screen still sharing or no?
And Joe, just a side comment, it was really good that he made it back, or a whole lot of us wouldn't be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, spot on, right? It's quite remarkable, especially you think about all these, you know, what if moments, right? And it's yeah, seriously, it's there was a lot for him. Now the next thing, which was quite interesting. Now, Glenn, you had shared a story about a truce happening in no man's land, and also I didn't catch the name. Whoever shared that story about the mud on the Somme and that sort of thing. What happens is that the 49th Battalion is committed 3 times to the Somme battle. So the first time in September, they go back, they get a few reinforcements. Then they in October on between the 3rd and 4th, they're at a different place now. I don't really have it up here, but it's just a trench rotation. They're going to spend 2 days in the trenches. Doesn't seem that bad, but there were 8 different alarms sent out about a German counterattack coming in. They're always on high alert. Even worse, it rained constantly. And so you can see right here, all this disrupted ground and that sort of thing. The soldiers just living. It's literally just a ditch, and that's where they are. Now imagine getting rained on for 2 days straight. It was terrible. And, you know, October rain's coming in. And so as they're trying to bring up supplies, you know, because once again, Frank's role saw him in and out of the trenches going up. This is probably where he was talking with that mud coming in. So then they come out of that trench rotation. Then just a few days later, they come back in and they're going to do another attack. And this is going to be one of the worst attacks of the war for the 49th Battalion. The initial plan was to break up the unit into different companies. So B company was going to attack Kenora Trench, which was just kind of a subsidiary, but it was important to get rid of that in case the Germans put a machine gun or something like that and they could fire down. Whereas the other 2 units were going to go right into the main objective, Regina Trench. Now, unfortunately, what had happened, and I didn't properly set it up, but C company is going to have messed up jumping off dates, so they're disorientated. So they actually all advance against subsidiary objective. And then, as I shared with Glenn and Chris, that these guys, D company, who go over the top against the main objective alone, they're going to go in with 109 guys, and by the end of the day, they come out with only 15. So it is absolutely devastating. Beforehand, and once again, Frank has a special role. He's part of the scouts, and their role before an attack is to go out into no man's land and scout out the ground and make sure it's all been dealt with. His role was to figure out how much German wire there was. Now, this is called Constantina wire. And so when Frank goes out, and they're under a guy named Len Holloway, Len Holloway writes a report afterwards saying that, you know, over here it was partially cut, and later on it was not cut at all, and that they should call off the attack or else it's going to be a massacre. Well, turns out, as you know, the battle had to go in nonetheless, and as mentioned before, you know, it ended up being a massacre. What happened afterwards was the casualties were so bad that that there was a lot of rumors about guys maybe being wounded or maybe being killed out of no man's land. And one of the guys who went into that attack was a scout named Pat Cronin. And when Pat went into the attack, someone had said he was wounded lying out around here. And so what the scout section did, and it sounds like from what Glenn's going to share right away, that perhaps that Frank was actually on this rescue mission to go find Pat Cronin. So Pat, do you want? I'm sorry, Glenn, do you want to just share what you remember about the truce?
Yes. Yeah, Grandpa had said there was right along their line there was a truce called, and whatever a truce was, and he volunteered, I guess, and it made sense because if one of his scouting unit was out there laying wounded, and he volunteered to go out and, as he said, pick them out of the barbed wire because they were wounded and tangled in the barbed wire. And I said to him at that time, I said, Grandpa, I said, that was bloody dangerous. And he said, it was okay. He said, I was okay. He said, I had a pistol tucked into my tunic. And I went, oh, been lined up by how many German snipers had rifles on him. So he later gets, and I have the letter that I shared with Joe, and I know we made a copy in your office there. He wins mentioned in dispatches. So it's General Haig at the end of the war has a big pronouncement in the London Gazette and says it's his duty and honor to recognize these soldiers for, it wasn't specific, for their great service. And Grandpa always said, I think that's why I got mentioned in dispatches, because that in fact was one step below a medal was mentioned in dispatches, but he figured that's why I got it when he'd gone up into no man's land.
Oh, I believe you got to think how ballsy that is, especially after an attack which had been so devastating. To go up, with this stretcher and just hoping for good luck and a kind reception from the enemy. It's just unreal. But yeah, apparently what had happened, the Germans said they had obliged with the truce, and they had actually come out in no man's land showing where the different wounded were. And so all that night, Pat and Frank and the rest of the guys were rescuing different wounded off the battlefield. Now they eventually did find Pat, the man they went out to look for, their friend. And sadly, what had happened with Pat Cronin, who was here, he was actually killed. And the same with Jock Wallace, who's here. They're actually buried almost side by side in the cemetery. And so when you guys go to France, one thing which might be interesting to do is actually to if you make it out to where that truce happened, that battlefield, and it's littered with debris. I think I shared with Chris and Glenn that one year I'd actually found a tooth in the field, obviously from a soldier. It would be kind of neat to go visit that grave because once again, this is an individual that Frank certainly knew and would have been a friend with and would have thought about, perhaps every Remembrance Day and so on and so forth. He was also an original member of the battalion, so they had done training together, they had sailed overseas, so on and so forth. So, and perhaps it's a grave he's never, I guess obviously it would be a grave he never visited, right? So anyway, but apart from that, so that's kind of his story on the Somme. So it all relates with Courcelette. So if you're kind of following your family history, this is where you want to go. But this isn't necessarily a preserved battlefield. Chris and I had spoken earlier about how so many of the battlefields now in France, they're just farmer fields. But there are a couple little enclaves on the Somme that you can still go to. So this is all battlefield, but there's a couple highlights. And a lot of them are kind of up here. And so we have Ocean Villas, which is now a tea room. So if you guys go there for lunch, it's awesome. Because it was one of the frontline villages. And now this lady, she's a British lady who runs it. And I'm very close with her too. She had just got it thinking she'll just make a bed and breakfast on the Western Front, that sort of thing, back in the 90s. She didn't realize that the building she had bought, the basement was the last surviving basement from the war, and it actually served as a field hospital. So there's all this graffiti left by soldiers from the battle, because if they got wounded on the front lines, like this is the front lines here, they were brought right back here, and it was a stretcher bearer post. The other thing too is now in her backyard, there's an actual trench, so you can see this whole trench system, and they had actually got archaeologists in to dig it out. And now when you go there, it's exactly how Frank would have seen it. Just down the road, you have Bowman Hamel, the Newfoundland Memorial Site, and then likewise there's original trenches, but they haven't been preserved in the same way, so now they kind of look a bit more like ditches. But they have a museum there, just in the building here, and you guys can sign up for a free guided tour with some of the young Canadian tour guides there. So it's well worth a visit as well. They also have the Newfoundland National Memorial right up here with the caribou. Just down the road from it, you have Teepville, and there's this massive memorial too. And this is a big British one for the Somme. And on these panels over here, there's 72,000 names for the missing. So it's well worth a visit, just so you kind of take it all in. And likewise, when the big attack started in July 1916, the British blew up a couple mines underground. And one of them was a place called Lochnagar, right on the center. And so you can see it's just on this old Roman road, actually, or just off it. And it's massive. You'll get vertigo just looking at it. And there's all these little memorials and info panels around. So it's there's enough to do. And there's some other stuff you guys can find on Google Maps, I'm sure. But these are kind of the main highlights I would suggest, along with Courcelette. Now kind of looking at the grand scheme. So once again, for Frank's story, if we're kind of going chronologically, once again, he did training in Folkestone, came to Boulogne, went to Ypres, did that 1915, 1916. Then in the fall, he goes down to the Somme. And then after all that, they're going to go to a quiet sector. They have to get more guys. They have to recuperate. So they're going to go right to Vimy Ridge. And so that's kind of the last sort of segment of our virtual tour, if you will. Now, Vimy is quite interesting because even though we often associate with just a battle there's a lot that happens. So even before that, 1915, there's 100,000 French soldiers who were killed or wounded trying to capture that ridge and another ridge. Now they capture the other ridge, but they don't actually capture Vimy. And so when Frank and the rest of the Canadians come into it, they're once again coming over, a former battlefield, and you can just imagine the sort of stuff he was seeing and smelling. Now, today at Vimy, they've actually preserved quite a bit of the ground. You can see this is a photo I took, I think, 2 years ago when it was snowy. And this is a sort of look it would have looked like when Frank got there, because he arrived at Vimy in the end of October. And pretty quickly, you can tell it's nearly winter time. And they were so short on men, they spent an extra long amount of time in the trenches. So each trench rotation would be about 2 weeks. And it was also the coldest winter on record. And so for certain days, it actually dropped to as low as minus 25 in the trenches. So you can imagine it's quite grueling.
Wow.
So obviously you're going to have the battle that happens later, and now it's a massive memorial site, but it's also preserved battlefield site too, which is quite amazing. When we look at Vimy from the air, this is an aerial image from February 1917. There's quite a few interesting features we can pick out. So here you can see the small holes. That's all shell holes from artillery shells. You can also see the zigzag trenches, and then right here you have no man's land, but it's actually denoted by what are mine craters underground, and you see how bitterly fought after each inch of ground was. Now underneath Vimy you have a bunch of chalk, and we'll get into that in a bit. It's the same chalk belt from the White Cliffs of Dover, but for Frank and the rest of the guys who were positioned on what was known as the crater line, it was a big problem, because you would be in that front line trench and you would hear underneath you a bunch of tapping. And what it was the Germans digging a tunnel underground, and then they were going to put in an explosive charge and then blow it up. And so it was a big fear for Frank and the rest of the guys there that, one day you'd hear the tapping, the next day you wouldn't, because they're filling up the explosive. And if you were there at the wrong moment, then obviously you were not only going to be killed, but vaporized. So even though you had a big battle, there's a few months that he's there, and it's over the Christmas period of 1916. And it's not exactly an ideal spot to be for Christmas time, right? With cold weather and also being so close to the enemy. Just to take us to the air here, and once again, I think Chris has been, and perhaps some other you, but you'll all be going soon. You can see how well preserved it is. Over here it's agriculture. If we put a LiDAR radar over, you guys can just get a better idea that that the battlefield, it's in the fields, but a large chunk of it is actually in the forest here too. So we'll get into that in a bit. And then here's the mine craters, of course, as well. Now this is the crater line, and so unfortunately now, if you guys can see into the trees over here, this is all sectioned off. You're not allowed to walk over there for safety. There's still a lot of unexploded ordnance. But about 500 meters down is where Frank was around Christmas time in 1916. Now it's going to be it's a special Christmas because it's super foggy out there, and it's the first time he's going to be in the front line for Christmas. And as you guys know, there's a famous story about a Christmas truce in 1914, but there's some other truces that happen as well. And I think Glenn, you got another story for us right away. If you can share.
Yeah, just very quickly, Grandpa remembers, but I wasn't sure exactly where it was, so this must have been it. He said there was a truce called, and they went out and met the Germans and were exchanging cigars and chocolate and whatever liquor they might have, which I'm sure wasn't a lot. And he said while they were out there, a shot rang out, and they all scurried. He said they all scurried back to their trenches. And then he said, I think a Canadian did that shot. That was about all. He didn't blame it on the Germans. He says, I think one of the Canadians fired that shot. Anyway, and they all scurried back, and that was it. They never went out there again.
Yeah, spot on, right? So anyway, but it's amazing to think that was just down the tree line over there. So yeah, but what eventually happens later on in February 1917, they move out to a place called Bruay up here, and then there they do a bunch of training, just to better prepare themselves for what's to come. Because of course, 2 months later, April 9th, 1917, you have the big Battle of Vimy Ridge, and what I'm gonna do here, also, and I'm pretty darn sure this Bruay is the town that photograph was taken. It's perhaps also taken at a photo studio in Paris. I just noticed that Chris and Glenn, you had identified it as Paris, but there's a similar one which is provenance for Bruay. So it's possible this is where that photo was taken. But nonetheless, just based off of his uniform, the insignia he's wearing, this is Frank only a few weeks before he's going to take part in the biggest battle in Canadian history. So obviously quite a significant photo. And you can see this little fleur-de-lis right here. And that's the official scout badge to show that he's part of that special unit. And then here we got Vimy. Now, I imagine for Chris, this will look familiar. This is what's known as a Grange subway. So in preparation for the Battle of Vimy Ridge, 13 subways, underground tunnels were dug. And the idea was they wanted to get the element of surprise. So if they dig these underground tunnels, they could store thousands of men down there, including the 49th Battalion in this particular subway. And then when the battle started, the Germans won't know, it's about to come, and then they get the full force. And so when you go to visit Vimy today, you can actually walk through this tunnel. They do guided tours. And so, and I had already spoken to some of the team. We're going to try and get you guys a VIP tour. I just got to know the dates, and then I'll send an email. And if it works, it works. If not, you can still visit a segment, but not the full one. Because as you'll see on the tour, there's actual rooms that I think Frank might have been based in when he was there. It's rooms for the runners and the scouts, which is quite cool. What I'm going to share now, it's just a 5-minute video, and it's a mini documentary about the Battle of Vimy Ridge, but it's not me talking. It's actually all the voices of guys Frank served with and how they remember the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So I'm just going to play it. Let me know if you can hear it, though, hopefully.
I don't think we can hear it, no.
You can't hear it? I'll send it over later, and you guys can watch it if you want, but it's all good. So anyway, once again, here's the visitor center. You guys will go. I'm just going to go over this kind of quickly because you can use it for reference in the future when you get there. You'll get it all explained to you by the tour guide. But the 49th Battalion during the battle were just in reserve, but nonetheless, they were still in the positions that the visitor center is now, and also the preserved trenches. So the trenches you'll walk through are the same ones that Frank walked through. When the battle starts, they're going to do a creeping barrage. And so at 5:30, it commences. the units actually crawl into the craters. So they really want to follow this barrage because after 3 minutes, it's going to move to a new position. And the idea is that once the explosions stop, if you can get in that place before the Germans can, really reconcile what's going on and put up defenses, whether a machine gun or whatever, then you can capture that ground. So they're following a strict time schedule. Eventually, by 11 a.m., they reached the objective. But then, unfortunately, for the other division attacking by where the memorial now stands on the left flank, the barrage had actually missed a segment, and so the machine guns were devastating, held up the whole attack. And so later on, when the 49th Battalion come in, they're actually getting hit on the side by machine gun fire from there. So the battle continues for a few days. It's also a snowstorm then, so yeah, it's quite grisly. But looking forward, like a lot of once again, the 49th Battalion battlefield later on when Frank's there, and there's a really interesting anecdote that Glenn had shared, was that when the 49th Battalion came in, they weren't going against the first line, but they were trying to push into these communication trenches, trying to really push the Germans off the ridge. Down here, it's off the ridge. Up here, it's on the ridge. And high ground was everything. And so whoever controlled these communication trenches, which would bring you from on the ridge to off the ridge, would control the movement for the reinforcements. So the 49th Battalion were working really hard to hang on to that position. When they were moving down this one trench here, one of the places they came into, right where the kind of map cuts off right here, they came across this big bunker. Can you guys see the bunker over there? And so it's still there to this day. You can actually see how it's sloped a little bit here. That's all from the damage from the Canadian artillery. And I don't know exactly the purpose of this, but it might have been a command bunker. And there's similar ones in the area as well, but it was certainly captured by the 49th Battalion. And it's interesting because Glenn, you had mentioned that there's a Luger still held in the family that you believe was captured from a German general. Is that correct? Oh, I think you're on mute, Glenn.
Randy sent this this afternoon. I had a long conversation. I wonder if we can see that. Can we?
Yeah, up by your camera, Dad.
Can you see that?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the C-96. Yeah.
He sent it. He went and got it out of a secret place.
Yeah.
And took some photographs. There's more of them, the back and around, but this one I printed off. So
That's awesome.
That's what Grandpa brought back. Now, he says that they had taken this off a German general. That's the story I remember. In talking to Randy, and hopefully Randy wasn't listening to my stories 20, 30 years ago, says, I remember that story too. And Randy, I hope you're still online, because he says, I remember that they took it off a German general as well. So I'm going to send these pictures up to you, Joe.
Yeah, that would be great.
Randy sent me, so you can do a little more research on it.
Yeah, well, the problem with so many of these is a lot of the German records are destroyed or they didn't keep track of what the serial number was. But there is records that we have on our end that the highest ranking German that was captured by the whole 3rd Canadian Division, so our guys, but much wider formation with 12,000 men and all that sort of thing, was captured by 2 49ers. Now, if we were, unfortunately, that video didn't work, but at the end of it, I have the first-hand account about a guy talking about how a 149er named Percy Riley and one other guy, and they were both scouts, had actually come across a German in a dugout and turned out to be a German general. And they had taken him prisoner. And they had told the German that we captured Vimy Ridge. And the German said, how could you capture Vimy Ridge? Not any unit in the whole wide world could capture such a fortified location. But they did it. And what's interesting, I shared it once again to Chris and Glenn, but the man they were talking about, Percy Riley, had been on a trench raid only 3 months before. And it was a hugely successful raid. They got in the German trench, they got it out, and there was virtually no casualties except for Percy Riley, who had captured a German pistol. And as he was bringing it home, he accidentally shot himself in the leg. And so I don't think Percy Riley would have been too anxious to take another, loaded German pistol But perhaps if it was Frank that we're talking about here, perhaps it was Frank PILKIE who brought that pistol home. And as I mentioned, that is the highest ranking German that was captured by the entire division on Vimy Ridge. So it's quite significant. So it's amazing if it is the general. It's hard to say for sure, but I know I believe it's the only time the 49th Battalion captured a general. So once again, it's kind of going down that route. So anyway, but quite remarkable. So just to move forward here, though, this is all April 1917. You can see the original line, and then as we mentioned, the Canadians had pushed through. They captured Vimy Ridge, so then the Germans fell back to their second line. So this becomes kind of reserve line area. This is now front line by May of 1917. And what we got up here, this is the 49th Battalion War Diary. And so each day there's a guy in the unit keeping track about what's going on and so forth. And we can see they're at a place called Villers-aux-Bois, which is a rest camp. And then on the 6th, they start moving up, and they move over to what's known as the quarry lines. Now, this is important because that's where the initially when they're at Villers-aux-Bois, it's cool to go to. You still get the shell fire. When they come up from Villers-aux-Bois, they go through Carency, and the headquarters is then established just off the road. The visitor center with preserved trenches is here where my cursor is. It's just off the road behind it. This is where the 49th Battalion headquarters was. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because now, Glenn, if you want to share kind of what you remember about your grandpa being wounded, do you want to just share the anecdote?
Yes. Grandpa was wounded. He got hit running. Well, Grandpa had a very quiet sense of humor.
Mhm.
And I knew that Grandpa had been wounded. And I said, of course, I was a young guy. How did you get wounded, Grandpa? Well, he said, I got wounded doing the 100-yard dash across Vimy Ridge. And he said, I was running like hell. And what happened was a German spotter crew spotted him going across the ridge. Obviously, he was carrying a message or a command over to someone. And he said a German mortar crew picked up on him, and they started firing shells. And one of them, the shrapnel from one of them knocked him down. And he was able, again, to limp out of there. Otherwise, he would have been totally blown up. And I've got his records, his medical records, and it talks about how the wound and how big it was and everything. And then it said how it got septic, which was pretty deadly out there.
Yeah.
A pretty severe infection. And they shipped him out to England. And he later said, you know what? That was a pretty lucky wound I got. I said, why, Grandpa, you got wounded? And he said, well, I missed the Battle of Passchendaele.
Yeah.
And because I was in England recovering, he said, I think I would have been killed at Passchendaele. And you can't argue about that in any way. But yeah, so that's where he got wounded. But he described it as doing the 100-yard dash across Vimy Ridge as fast as he could run.
And so just to put that into context, so from when he was wounded, and Glenn, you had actually pointed this out from his war record, that it says that he was going from the 49th headquarters to a Canadian Mounted Rifles headquarters, which was a different battalion. Now, the CMRs were based down here. So it's somewhere kind of, in the back area, right around here. You can kind of draw the line from up here to somewhere down here. That's where he was wounded. So it's somewhere in this section. So all that to be said, when you guys go to the parking lot before you go to the visitor center at Vimy Ridge and so on and so forth, you're pretty much kind of in that spot, that general area that he would have been in. It's really hard to pin down the exact spot, but it does make you wonder. And there's a couple of spots, like, you're running from cover to cover, and this is about 100 yards across, right? So it's even possible that he was running from this trench line over there, doing a little shortcut. So, yeah. Anyway, now moving forward, I guess it's so true too, Glenn. By the way, one last thing: Battle of Passchendaele, which happens in October 1917, right at the time he's getting discharged from hospital. 80% of the force that goes over the top with the 49th is killed or wounded. And it's the bloodiest battle that the 49th ever has. Still to this day for the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, it's bloodier than any battle in World War II by a long side. And so it's extremely well, just devastating for him, because he was part of the first reinforcement batch when they came back, and you know, when he's trying to find his old comrades, well, there's hardly anyone left, right? Anyway, but when you guys go to Vimy, there's a couple locations I'd mentioned before. We're gonna try and get you guys a VIP tour that takes about an hour, and you go quite in depth through the tunnel system on the ridge. There's also monuments, so on and so forth to see. We got the wounding site, which I put down here. But there's some other places you might want to visit. So just kind of moving along, Cabaret Rouge is a massive and beautiful cemetery. You can see it right here. And it's also the location they took out the unknown soldier, which is now in Ottawa. So it's quite significant in that regard. There's quite a few others. There's even a 49th officer there as well. Likewise, up here at Notre Dame de Lorette, it's the largest French cemetery of the First World War. And they have this, it's called the Ring of Remembrance, and it's everyone who died in this county and the one county to the north. And it's incredibly moving. There's something like 500,000 names. There's no age, there's no nationality, there's no nothing. But it just absolutely takes your breath away. Just to the south, you have this village. It's called Ablain Saint Nazaire. And even though it looks like a big village now, it's all destroyed and all rebuilt except for the old church. And now the church, you know, it's an absolute battleground, and you can see all the shrapnel strikes and that sort of thing. And you're welcome to walk around it, and you can even touch it and that sort, and you know, just take photos or whatever. But the coolest thing is it was a tourist attraction during the war as well. And so hundreds of soldiers actually left their name and inscribed their name. So while you're going through there, you'll actually see Toronto and different units inscribed. There's even 2 from the 49th Battalion, guys who left their signature. And later you have Villers-aux-Bois as well. And at Villers-aux-Bois, that was one of the sites, the rest camps that Frank was at. And once again, that's where he was just days before his wounding. So when you go there, if you go by the church, there's even some graffiti that's now framed up, a Canadian cap badge that was engraved into a wall. And then and that's also where headquarters was and stuff like that. So anyway, and you guys will, if you go on Google Maps, once again, there's other sites to take in and see as well. But anyway, it's a very neat area, and Vimy Ridge will certainly take your breath away. And then just kind of moving on, as I mentioned before, with and this is just kind of wrapping up, getting to the end here, because once again, I could talk all night with this stuff, and I apologize for all the rambling. But when Frank was in hospital, there was quite a bit going on, especially that Battle of Passchendaele. But really, the front line stayed the same. Later that spring, in 1918, the Germans got a bunch more reinforcements because the Eastern Front closed down. Russia left the war, and so they tried to do offensive after offensive, and it hit all sectors except where the Canadians were, right near Vimy Ridge. And so by the summer 1918, when the Allies were going to do the counteroffensive, the French had massive casualties, the British had massive casualties, but the Canadians were still an intact force. And so the Canadians would become the shock troops. So they're going to be kind of the spearhead of that advance that summer that's ultimately going to win the war. What they do, they pull them out to this small location. If you guys go here, and it might be worth a visit, depending on time and that sort of thing. People ask you, what the hell are you doing here? Because it's just absolutely no one goes there. But it's quite significant because Frank would have recognized these places. For instance, when Frank came back to the unit after the Battle of Passchendaele in the end of 1917, they were at St. Hilaire for a couple weeks. Later, they go to the trench rotations, and then they come back out, and they're based in Fockenham for a month in May of 1918. When he's based in Fockenham, he comes down the road with all his buddies from the scout section. They come here, they turn left, they turn right, and then just behind what's now the town hall and is now a school, there's a little photo studio there. And so when he's there, he gets a photo taken with all his buddies. And so you can see Frank right here. And these are all the guys he would have known so well. Pat Cronin, for instance, would have been in this photo if he had survived another 2 years. Luckily, this photograph is actually identified, so we know the names of the guys here. And so it's quite a neat story when you start breaking it down. But anyways, that was taken right here. They do a bunch of training with tanks and so on. They're planning for open warfare because they're thinking that summer they can break out the German trenches. They have a new strategy, and that's exactly what happened. So on the 8th of August, the offensive starts, and for Frank and the rest of his scout section here, they're actually advancing ahead of the rest of the battalion. So let's say the rest of the 600 guys are back here. Frank and his buddies are way at the tip of the spear, and they're pushing into this wood. Now, what they don't realize is right behind the wood, it drops down. There's a little valley, and that's where the Germans have all their artillery guns. And so the Germans put up a huge fight. So all of a sudden they come, they're advancing through high grass. And the Germans, they get in the sights of the Germans. They don't realize it. They get ambushed. And so quickly, Tommy Turner right here, you can see in the center, who sat right beside Frank. He falls down. No one even realizes he's still missing. So his name's on the Vimy Memorial. He falls in the high grass, so they can't find the body. And Bobby Henderson over here, he gets shot in the shoulder. And of the force that's 10 strong, within moments, 7 of them are either killed or wounded. So I think Frank, based off his position, these are his buddies, he's likely in this this battle as well. And eventually what happens is Bobby Henderson, I apologize, Glenn and Chris, because I already shared the story with you, but Bobby Henderson keeps fighting even though he got shot in the shoulder, and he comes back to the guys in the rear here. He brings up a machine gun and he employs it and wipes out the enemy force. And then him and the rest of the guys, they move in, once again, special forces sort of thing. They're outnumbered, but they clear the wood more or less. And then the rest of the units come in. But just there, that's another moment that you guys might have not been here. It's a day that, the 49th Battalion was the most successful day of the war. And but for the scout section in particular, it was one of the worst days. Literally within seconds, 10 guys, of 10 guys, there were only 3 left. And such was the fighting. But, once again, it's a battlefield that's kind of out of the way. But if you guys got extra time, it might be worth a visit. You can see where the Obercourt, like a nearby village is. So I'm sure you can triangulate. But anyway, so after this battle, they do quite a few other battles. And eventually they break into Belgium. And they finish the war at a place called Mons. And so and after that they march to Brussels, and then eventually they come home. After the war, as you had shared, Glenn, and this is kind of the last slide of the presentation here, but Frank is mentioned in dispatches, and so he was recommended for this in January 1919. I know, Glenn, you have the documents there, and I don't think this actually came through till about 6 months later. But this is one of the 3 gallantry awards that most guys got. Well, you have the Victoria Cross on top, but you'll have the mentioned dispatches above that. You have the military medal, and then also the Distinguished Conduct Medal. And as you can see here, unfortunately, we don't have a citation. But based off what you were saying, Glenn, and also just his general courage throughout the war, it's perhaps just a general thing where he'd always been a reliable soldier, and he was never afraid to be, in action. He was always in the front line. And
what is interesting, I just have a little card here. I'll show you. This was a little Christmas card that it says to greet you, and you open it up, and this would have come back home. It said, "Kind remembrances with sincere wishes for a Christmas of peace and goodwill." It says, "From mother and father to Frank in Belgium, Europe."
Wow.
So he would have received that, but it says in Belgium. So at one point, or maybe they thought he was in Belgium.
Well, Glenn, that could have been. I mean, he was in Belgium twice for Christmas, so it's either right at the start or right at the end. So it's either or sort of thing.
Yeah. And so I'll just get my chair back here again. There was. I know he said at the end of the war, he said because they were scouts, they had a lot of freedom, and I guess he had freedom to go certain places.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of caught on the war was coming to an end. And there was, I'm sure, tons of rumors of when it was going to end. So he said he and some of his buddies left, like they had advanced 18K, he said, which was amazing at the time, toward Mons. But just before the war ended, he said him and some of his buddies slipped into Paris. And they were there when they announced the end of the war. And I think, I can only guess, but I'm thinking that was the biggest party that he ever went to, because the streets, people just poured into the streets and dancing and singing and drinking and whatever. But he said he and his buddies were there in Paris when they announced the end of the war.
Better place to be than the front. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You gotta love it, because once again, it's almost like superheroes, right? You know, you get the whole, you make movies about this sort of stuff, right? You know, you're kind of on a different level, you can get away, you get the freedom.
Yeah.
You know? And once again, the remarkable thing is, by that stage of the war, you know, of the original unit, he's only one of a handful of guys left, right? So he would have known all the officers and stuff like that, right? So yeah, but the huge problem too, and I'm sure, Glenn, you might be able to say something about this too, from what you know about your grandpa, was when they came home. Because, you know, you get so used to your experience in combat and that sort of thing, and then to go back to a prairie life is quite challenging.
Yeah, one of the stories I was told, not by Grandpa, I think it would have come from Grandma, to my mother and then to me, was that when he got home, he got one of the soldier settlements, which was a quarter of a land outside of Vermilion. And he said there were a couple of times, one specifically, when he woke up in the middle of the night and woke up his wife, Grandma Mildred, and he said he was kind of in a trance. He was looking for his gun. He could see way out in the field through their window, bedroom window, he could see explosions and like artillery blowing things up, and he was looking for his gun to go to the battle. And I guess that was what was called post-traumatic stress syndrome. And yeah, and there were some other things too, which I won't mention. Because they're, you know, I wasn't quite sure the truth, but anyway. But yeah, that was, I guess I have a number of other stories, and I don't want to bring them up at this time. I know, Joe, you've asked me if I could put together a number of the stories that Grandpa told me. And I certainly will. Like the time he was out in no man's land and he was scouting in the middle of the night, and he went right into their lines, and all of a sudden he recognized how much danger he was in. He buried himself in the mud, I guess buried breathing, because right on top of him was a German sentry with a rifle.
Oh.
And he just laid there frozen until the sentry moved off.
That's pretty freaky.
And another quick, and this is more a humorous story. My mother told me this. She said this was way after the war. And she told that when they were living in Edmonton, and she drove Grandpa down to the Legion to meet a number of his old 49 buddies. And as he came through the door of the Legion, and they were, I'm sure, in the pub, they all yelled out, Frank, way to see you, way to go. Frank, do you remember when you marched us in behind the German lines and out again? He had, I guess they were joking. He must have led them in behind the lines, not knowing, and then recognized, and then led them back out again.
That's hilarious.
And the other story was, I said, Grandpa, you remained a private the whole time. I said, weren't you ever offered an officer's commission? And he said, yes. He said, I was offered it several times. But he said, you know what? I observed something. He said when the units went over the top, there were always officers on either side of their unit guiding the troops to make sure they stayed in line with where they were going. And he said, funny thing, but he said, those were the officers that the German snipers shot at. And he said, I decided to remain a private and not take the opportunity of getting picked off by a German sniper.
There we go.
Said, yeah, that was damn good strategy, Grandpa.
Yeah.
That's why you guys are here, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah.
It's so good. So yeah, but no, brilliant. So anyway, but I'm glad. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know I did a bunch of rambling and that sort of thing.
No, it was fantastic.
No, it's fine.
You guys got learned something new or something like that. I know Chris and Glenn, I've already shared a lot with this with you already, but hopefully it'll be good to have as a resource when you guys are out there in France. And I think only a few weeks now, right?
Yes, we're going over. Chris is the organizer. Hi, Chris. He's got plane tickets booked for March 28th. We leave out of Calgary. And it's a 9-hour overnight flight.
Oh, good deal. Hey?
I just received my little neck cushion that I can roll up with eye cover. So hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully,
And we end up going first, actually, right from Paris up to Arras area. And once again, going to hit a bunch of these on the first couple of days. So it'd be the 28th, the 29th, the 30th that we're doing a lot of this World War I stuff.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll shoot. What I'll do, because I got a contact at Vimy, so I'll shoot, and I'll just maybe say on the 29th if there's chance that they might be available, and then if not, then we can kind of look at different dates. Then I'll just let you guys know. But then as far as that goes, it's pretty straightforward. You just got to be at a certain place at a certain time. They do a little schedule, and yeah, but it'll be worth it, because with that tunnel, it's they've kind of changed it for health and safety. And Chris, since you've been there, it might have changed even. But you'll literally be walking the footsteps of Frank at Vimy Ridge, in the same tunnel that he was going through, which is pretty cool.
yeah.
So,
Will be.
but anyway, yeah, it should be a great trip. And yeah, I'll just let you, I guess, Chris, I'll just email you and that sort of thing. If, by the way, the other thing too, guys, if anyone's interested, and I imagine Chris shared my email with you guys, I have a 49th Battalion mailing list. It's sent out a online magazine, that sort of thing. It's just kind of the stuff going on with the 49th. If you guys are interested at all, once again, it doesn't cost anything, but just shoot me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list. So I'll also share with Chris and Glenn, and you guys can diffuse it out. But the link to this webinar, and once again, I'll just be uploaded on YouTube, so then you guys can have it, and you can share it if anyone couldn't make it tonight and you think they might be interested, then they can watch it too. So
Great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, Joe,
Yeah, no much.
I think
And quick question, what was the name of that cafe again, the coffee shop or whatever? There was a story that you had.
Was it the one on the Somme, like with the trench
I
in the
think
back? Or yeah, it's
Yeah.
called Ocean Villas. So officially, there's a French name for the town, but then the British soldiers couldn't pronounce it, and so they called it Ocean Villas. So if you search up Ocean Villas, yeah, I highly recommend it. And then if you go there, tell them you know me, and then it'll be funny. They actually have one of our regimental plaques in the tea room, because their restaurant is totally World War I inspired. So it's they've got rifles up there found in the mud, and I think you'll like it. And they even have some relics that you can purchase and souvenirs and that sort of thing. So it's perfect. Great place.
And the name of the town it's in again, or is that the name of the town?
Yeah, it's I don't know if we have a chat here. I'm not sure. I could send it to you by email though. So, but I highly recommend it. I'm trying to think if there's there's a couple other places in Ypres, for instance, where it's kind of World War I themed, which might be cool too. I'll shoot you the link there too. So.
And Joe, when we were there, Chris and I,
yeah,
Joe took us below where the general public usually doesn't go, and the pictures of the lines of rifles and machine guns, and then he pulled out a drawer with pistols, and there was Griesbaugh's actual pistol with his name engraved on the side of the pistol. So you let us hold it. Was like holding a piece of history. And as you said, Grandpa would have seen that, having reported to headquarters many, many times.
Yeah.
And the other thing that your front office told me, I can't remember the name of the woman there. That was there.
Kathleen, maybe?
Is it
Yeah.
Kathleen?
The manager, corrections manager, yeah.
Yeah, she said that, Joe, that you've been visiting these sites since you were 13.
Oh, actually,
Is
11, even 11, even younger. Yeah, but always huge interest, right? So, but yeah, I did my high school in Belgium, and so so I would go out 3 times a week to Ypres and that sort of thing. My first summer job was on the Somme digging trenches, and then later I worked as one of the tour guides at Vimy. You know, in one of my first years at university, so I took a semester off to do that, and I learned some French. So, but yeah, for me, it's just always been lifelong interest. So, and it's great to do these webinars with you guys to connect, I guess, Glenn, and learn the stories you learned from your grandpa. You know, it's just amazing.
Well, I know you've been a guest speaker it's in October that the 49th Battalion holds a regimental supper.
Yeah.
And in the past, you've been one of the main speakers.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Well, we just do a little keynote because it's always but this year, guys, it's actually all based on the Somme on Courcelette. And what we're trying to do is get as many families out as possible. And so if you guys would like to join, yeah, I think it's normally late October. But once again, if you guys send me your emails, I can add you to that mailing list, and you guys will get the invite as soon as we know. So, and what's neat is usually we get other people who, you know, they're like yourselves, who they might be the grandchildren or great grandchildren of guys literally perhaps in the same scout section or wounded in the same battle. Last year we actually had the family. I don't know if you guys know the what's his name, Chris Hadfield. You know the his grandpa and the grandpa's brother were both snipers in the 49th Battalion. So his great uncle was actually killed at Passchendaele. And the other, his grandpa got wounded about the same time as Frank, and so likewise he attributed his survival in the war because he was in at Passchendaele. So it's kind of neat the people that come out, right? So
now, one other thing, I'll make a little advertisement for you, Joe. They also tell me that in one of these battlefields, you've had a kind of a passion, whatever, to raise a monument, to have a permanent monument put with the 49th Battalion badge and everything on the monument at one of the places where the 49th fought. And you're going to be doing some fundraising, but you're doing it in an interesting way. Dean, you could do this. You and I, maybe. Joe's going to run 100. You're going for 100K, aren't you?
100K, yeah. So in one day. So, but yeah. Anyway, but we got well, back in November, I was just back in. That was the last time I was in France, and just secured the ground with the mayor. We got, you know, Glenn, where you're sharing that story where, you know, your grandpa got the concussion and everything like that. Yeah. So the land where the monument's going to be, and it's going to be a full statue of a 49er. It's 100 yards away. So we already got the land. We just need to make a monument. So we're just raising funds. So yeah, but if you guys go on GoFundMe, I can send out on the email and that sort of thing. Perhaps you guys can share. But it's just called Marathon for Remembrance. So I've been doing a lot of training, and then
yeah, and don't ever ask me to do this ad.
Yeah.
But your office people did, and I thought that's great. What a goal for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I haven't done it yet, right? So, but no, and yeah, I've been doing a lot of training. So this morning,
the only guy
and that sort of thing, yeah.
The only guy in the picture that could maybe run beside you is grandson McGregor. I see he's online. So McGregor, could you have
made it down, McGregor?
Yeah. Are you a runner or?
Yeah, he's a grandson.
I just run up and down basketball courts, nothing crazy.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, you might be tall like me. I did as a high school student. I did a bunch of basketball. Because
nice.
Yeah. Well, you know, are you pretty tall or?
I'm 6'2", tallish.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Oh, awesome. Yeah, but still fitter than most, I'm sure. You're right. So yeah. Awesome. But yeah, no, I'll send that over to you guys. And I'm just thinking what I'll do too, I'll send you guys the the presentation as well. There's no notes or anything on that, but then you guys can just kind of skim through, and there's all the maps and stuff, right, which should be helpful. So yeah, but
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Dee.
I know. Yeah, Wendy, you had a comment or something.
Just so the family knows, my granddaughter Kelly's daughter Sierra is the second fastest runner in Alberta.
wow,
Wow.
really?
Oh, I think we know where she got that from, eh?
It wouldn't be the 100-yard dash by chance, eh?
100 and relay, and both my daughters did marathon.
Wow, brilliant.
I couldn't run across the street.
It's too
My
funny.
legs were too long, the rest of me was too short, and I just had no balance. But man, did they ever get the speed.
That's awesome. Seriously, impressive. Yeah,
She
amazing.
prefers to run on horses. She does rodeo. Won a berth to Las Vegas for the national finals rodeo, so that's really her big sport.
Oh,
So we're looking for scholarships in 2 areas, hopefully.
oh my.
That's brilliant, hey? And Randy,
Yeah,
I just saw your message. Thank you so much. Very kind of you. And I know you can hear me, but you might not be able to say something back.
Thank you for all your time there, Joe.
Oh,
Really
my pleasure. Thank you guys for tuning in, right? So yeah, it's sometimes not the most exciting thing here about all these old historical facts, but I'm glad you guys found it interesting.
For sure.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And
Well,
Glenn,
thank
I don't
you
know if
for-
you're trying
Thank
to
you
say
for having
something.
it in the, sorry, I was going to say thank you for having it in a format that we will be able to show for generations in the way of this video.
Yes.
Through
Absolutely.
it. Thank you.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
pleasure, right? So yeah, really well, thank you all.
saw
And
that video, Glenn, that you made with Grandpa in the living room there many, many years ago,
Yeah.
wherever that is.
Yeah, I've got a digital copy of that I can share again. I've shared with some of you, but I will share with the rest of you for sure.
I would really like that. Thank you. That would be great.
Yeah, brilliant. So awesome. Glenn, brother, I think you might be
Mike's
muted,
off,
Glenn.
Dad.
You can see you're talking, but
Yeah, it was on a little tiny cassette, those little tiny things. But Chris has copied it. And the other thing, Joe, you might be in, and Chris, you should send this to Joe. I think he'd be interested. Chris, you did this for a class one time. He dressed up in a First World War uniform, and he went into the class, this is at Victoria Comp, and played the part of Grandpa, and just ad-libbed about him being there, and even had a pipe in his hand like Grandpa. And he casually pretended that what it was like there and what he did in a very calm way. And you might want to share that with Joe. I think you might be interested just to see it. It's kind of neat to see.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That'd be great. So
All
awesome.
right.
That's nice.
Okay.
A bit of sharing back and forth. So yeah, and Glenn, if you could send those photos of the pistol that Randy has, that'd be awesome. Just for
Yeah, he laid out a number of them. I only printed this one, but
okay.
I got them all in line. So I will copy you.
Yeah, that'd be great. As long as it's okay with you.
Close up of the serial number.
And Randy, you gave the serial number and all that, didn't you?
Yeah, just don't give it to the feds. Yeah.
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 The other thing too, just in case, because I'm sure Randy, you're familiar. Like now with those pistols, I think under law you can't really transfer them. But us as a museum, if you ever wanted to have it come to us, we can still receive them. And then and as Glenn and Chris saw, we have a space downstairs. In fact, the last pistol we got in, it was attributed to a 49th Battalion officer, and it had actually been sent to the RCMP for destruction. And then it eventually came to us. So, but anyway, just in case, and once again, absolutely no pressure on your part, but there would certainly be a home for it here. So, yeah. Anyway, but awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for tuning in.
We'll see you.
Yes, thank you.
Stay with me. Yeah, awesome. And I'll send this all over to you guys shortly, or to Glenn and Chris. So
Thank
Okay.
you.
See everyone.
Thank you.
Chris, have a
Yeah.
good evening
Thank
and
you.
safe trip to your friends. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
So The Last of Us. Now I don't even know how to get out.